His name is Hussein Aboubakr Mansour. He was born in Cairo and raised in a traditional Arab Muslim family, but by the tender age of 11, he became radicalized to hate.
From a very early age, the idea that Jews, they represent some sort of primordial evil, was just everywhere.
Inspired by 9/11 and the U.S. invasion of Iraq, he decided to devote his life to jihad.
Evil Americans bombing Iraqi children, evil Zionist pigs. I was infatuated by all of this.
Then he set off on a path that would change everything.
So I decided the best thing that I can do to fight those evil Jews is to learn their language.
Would learning Hebrew bring him one step closer to his violent goal? Or perhaps there was something different in store for him. Hi, I'm Rabbi Ammi Hirsch, and you're listening to In These Times. I've always been fascinated by religion's capacity to inspire both so much good and so much harm. The prophet Jeremiah quotes God as saying, "My words are like fire." In other words, come close so that you can warm yourself by the heat of faith, but if you come too close, faith can consume everything in fiery destruction. It's not clear to me whether religion is the root cause of so much mayhem or simply the excuse. Do religious extremists hate and murder because religion has led them there, or are these passions already lurking within their hearts and they found an outlet in religion? Did religion distort Osama bin Laden, or did Osama bin Laden distort religion? To help me answer these questions, to shed light on the problem of religious extremism, I've asked Hussein Aboubakr Mansour to join me today on the podcast. Hussein, welcome to In These Times. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Rabbi Hirsch. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to have you with us. I read your book and I was enraptured by it. I heartily recommend it to all of our listeners. It's called Minority of One, The Unchaining of an Arab Mind. Can you tell us about your background?
I was born in 1989 in Cairo to an average, middle-class Arab Muslim Egyptian family. We were generally conservative, like almost, as you know, all families in pretty much the big wide Middle East. Not particularly committed to any ideology or any, extreme form of religiosity. And I grew up in the 90s as the tide of certain types of extreme Islamic orthodoxy and fundamentalism were kind of becoming hegemonic over many parts of the society, or over many societies really in the Middle East. And that was, my childhood. I grew up just in the culture at a moment with the intensification of religious rhetoric, a lot of hostility to others, to the West, to Israel, to Jews. And from a very early age, the idea that Jews, they represent some sort of primordial evil was just everywhere. It was in the cartoons I watched, the best movies and TV shows, the villains were Jews, the caricatures in the newspapers, the prayers in the mosques. But life is carrying out as normal. It's for most Egyptians, it's something abstract. It's like, oh, Jews are evil, but they don't live around Jews. All of this got really heavily intensified. I mean, all of this anti-Semitism and anti-Western rhetoric really went on steroids after 9/11.
Hussein, many of us in New York were traumatized by 9/11. We're never going to forget the moment that we saw the planes hit and where we were and what we were thinking about. We were worried about people we knew who worked there. In this congregation, 5 or 6 members of our congregation were killed in 9/11. I am very curious to hear from you. What was the reaction of the Arab world in the Middle East to the sight of the World Trade Center being demolished?
In my immediate surroundings, my family, neighborhood, the mosque, school, there was a sense of joy. There was a confusion at the beginning that quickly turned into joy. Finally, America got what it deserved. That's what my teachers said. That's what the imams said. There were pamphlets being handed out in the street, calling people to kind of look what Allah is doing to those infidels. In the period immediately after 9/11, a lot of things were happening at the same time. The global war on terror, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, and the second Intifada. And if anybody remembers the Second Intifada, it was extremely violent. You had suicide bombings every other day in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, in restaurants and buses. So all of this was on the news, and this kind of conspiracy theory mindset, or the idea that there's some sort of a global conspiracy now between the Jews and the Americans to destroy Islam and Muslims and Arabs, really went on steroids on Arab TV and Al Jazeera and all of the major Arabic network. I remember sitting as a child in front of the TV, watching in slow motion over and over, the clips of the little Palestinian child, Muhammad al-Dura, who was claimed to be murdered in cold blood by Israeli soldiers on video, and just in slow motion with sentimental music. And that period truly, truly was an extremely radicalizing period for my generation.
You were born after Israel signed a peace agreement with Egypt, if I'm correct. And so all of this was going on, presumably with the support of the government. All of this was going on despite the fact that Egypt had signed a peace agreement with Israel.
That's true. I mean, for their domestic politics, it's good to push these narratives. They do that. So they do several things to achieve several political objectives on several areas, politics. That's how it is.
So it was in their political interest.
It's in their political interest. If you think also about it, after 9/11, all countries, all states in the Middle East and the Muslim world were terrified because there was something called the freedom agenda, right? The neocons in DC, their explanation of 9/11, and in very simplified terms, that Islamic terrorism, and it's partially, in my opinion, it's partially true. It was a great insight, just wasn't complete and led to bad policies. That one of the main drivers of international Islamic terrorism was tyranny and despotism and the lack of democracy and human rights in those countries. And if you can have a democratic transformation, you will start having religious reformation. That was really a lot of the neocon ideas that led to the invasion of Iraq. It was kind of their empirical test. Let's show you how we're going to make a Muslim country, an Arab country, a democracy, and that will fix a lot of things. A state like Egypt was aware of this. So to kind of ratchet up the anti-American rhetoric, the conspiracy theory, was a kind of building a psychological wall between their population and the freedom agenda.
Mm-hmm. And you were all in on this. You were a young child.
I was a young child. I didn't know. Of course, I didn't have this analytical perspective. I was just on the receiving end of evil Americans bombing Iraqi children and torturing them. Evil Zionist pigs killing Palestinian children, drinking their blood. That was what I received. And I was young. I was 13 or 14. So even my ways of consumption were, cartoons, sentimental videos, the very fiery, bombastic, sermons from the mosques, these sort of things. I was infatuated by all of this, and I wanted to be a part of it because it was like living in a real Lord of the Rings. There is a Lord Mordor out there who's purely evil. And I'm little Frodo. I want to help destroy that evil Mordor.
So you're all in. I think you wrote in your book that you began to learn Hebrew. You were skilled in languages, and you taught yourself Hebrew in order to be a better jihadist, to understand the Jews in their own language.
I was a jihadist wannabe at that age. I started going to mosque 5 times a day. And I think it's very notable to say that even my own parents never went to the mosque 5 times a day. I stopped listening to music because music is forbidden. I started to become definitely more radical, but I was also a nerd. So I decided the best thing that I can do to fight those evil Jews, who are kind of the center of all of these neuroses, is to learn their language, the dark language of Mordor. And that way I can figure out what they are up to. High-speed internet had just started. Things like YouTube started 2007, for example. All of a sudden, there was access for me to do this from my own bedroom. And actually, maybe something also to mention that before this, I actually sucked at languages. I failed in every single second language test. I'm not kidding. In school, my obsession with the Jews, my obsession with hating Israel, actually unlocked in me unbelievable linguistic skills. And I think people who can hear me now speaking English can realize that. In a matter of a few years, I was fluent in both Hebrew and English from the internet, from movies, from videos, from music videos.
And I should say to the audience Hussein and I speak Hebrew from time to time. He has got an amazing Hebrew. I think you mentioned at some point that your Hebrew is good enough to fool Israelis too. That you're actually you could pass as a native Israeli or a person who grew up in Israel at least, or spent many years in Israel.
On a good day, yes. On a good day, yes.
So that's awesome, actually, to hear that. You start teaching yourself Hebrew. You start reading books that were written by Jews for Jews. So you begin to learn about Jews as we see ourselves. And what happens to you? Did you accomplish what you set out to do, which is to become a better jihadist, or did something change?
Everything changed. Everything. One of the greatest things about literature, good literature, not what you find in most bookstores today, is that literature permits you to experiment with being somebody else from a very safe space, right? You really experience another way of being human, another human being, their emotions, their feelings. That's what great authors do. And as you said, just starting experiencing what does it mean, or learning what does it mean to be Jewish, what is Jewish life from a Jewish experience, was a truly, truly transformative experience, because I realized there are no vampires here. There are no Draculas. There is no Lord Sauron. There are no evil people. There are no demons. They are people. And this was a slow process. I'm not going to say this was an immediate. Anybody who's looking for the magic bullet and the pill that will just do it all, it's not there. It was slow and painful, because everything that I thought about reality was being uprooted, including my own identity structure. My world was collapsing in a lot of ways. Learning about the stories of Jewish history, the stories of the Holocaust, the stories of the state of Israel, the stories of the Chalutzim, the pioneers, the stories of the great Hebraists, Mendley, Mocherat Sfarim, Echad Ha'am. Learning about the lives of those people, the struggles of Zionism, what Zionism really is, what did Zionism sought to achieve, what did it achieve, what it had to give up on. Learning all of these things, it's just completely transformed the way I see reality, the way I understand the Jewish people. And I realized that I knew nothing. And that's a terrifying idea. What's even more terrifying, really, really more terrifying, is that I realized that the adults around me, they also know nothing. That was not an easy realization for somebody who, at the time, I was 17 or 18.
That's just so astonishing to me because, we are such creatures of our own environment. And in particular, in countries in the Middle East, and I know this from the Jewish experience as well, and the Israeli experience, we're very connected to the tribe and to the family and to the motherland. And for you to break out of that and to lift the veil on all the lies and to begin to see the truth as a young person is just astonishing to me. Did that cause some kind of emotional crisis in you, or were you excited about it?
There was excitement for sure, but also there was a deep crisis. There was a mental crisis, a psychological crisis. It's a complete loss of orientation. The Middle Eastern specifically were people of clan, family, were people of our neighborhoods, of our towns, of our language. We're very proud of who we are in our culture. We're really the most ancient civilized region in the entire world. Half of human history is the Middle East. It's unbelievable. All of that start to collapse for me was not easy. That's my psychological ties started to be undone. I stopped going to the mosque. Of course, I lost my faith completely. It was a crisis, and it wasn't easy, and I didn't know what I was doing. It's just there is something that was happening that I could not stop. I just couldn't stop. It's kind of discovering that I don't know anything, and I have to find out.
And you write about how this opened up a chasm between you and your family as well. Do you want to describe that a little bit?
My family, they are, by Egyptian standards, they're very average, normal people. They kind of embody almost what the culture wants to create a family. The mother that stays home to, doesn't work to raise the kids and feed them well. The father who provides and provides structure, kind of the Arab father. They did all of that, but all of a sudden, I'm starting to completely lose connection with all of this. I'm starting to develop ideas and understand the world in ways that they have no idea about. And that started creating this huge gap that only got widened with time. And when the clash happens, it's going to be irreconcilable. And I had to leave the family.
So tell us about the Arab Spring and your interaction with the Arab Spring that eventually led to your request for asylum in the United States.
I've never had an interest in politics. I have an interest in culture. And maybe that's why I ended up loving Jewish culture and Jewish history so much. Politics happened to me. I clashed with politics unwillingly and unwittingly. When I was doing what I was doing in 2010, that was right before the Arab Spring and almost kind of a prologue to the Arab Spring. I decided to go visit something called the Israeli Academic Center. It doesn't exist anymore in Egypt. It used to be an annex to the Israeli embassy, and Egyptians were banned from visiting it. But I decided to go visit anyways because I've never met an Israeli or a Jewish person, and they wanted finally to do so. Upon that visit, all hell broke loose. Basically, the Egyptian security services started an investigation. They suspected I was a Zionist agent and a Mossad spy. And unironically, they arrested me. They arrested my father. Why am I trying to visit Israelis? Why am I trying to talk to Israelis? So this happened in 2010. That's when my family did an intervention. And that's when the clash happened. At the end of 2010, I spent the worst time of my life, about 2 months and a half, in a military intelligence interrogation facility because I was suspected of being a spy.
Are you comfortable speaking more about your experiences in prison?
There were various periods of engagement with the Egyptian authorities that ranged from, 3-day long interrogations with the Egyptian Amn Dawla or state security apparatus. Towards the end of 2010, I was supposed to be conscripted into the Egyptian army like everybody else, but instead of being sent to a boot camp, I was sent to military intelligence interrogation. It was a truly horrifying experience. I was accused of being a Zionist agent, a Mossad spy, a Jewish convert. The head of the prison, General Muhammad Abdullah, he was a sadistic man. He took a special joy in entering the cell and making soldiers beat me in front of him while calling me a Jewish dog, Jew lover, yelling at me, and while the soldiers beating me and stripping my clothes down, beating me with their belts. It was a cruel and brutal experience. And within that experience, I really didn't care about anything but getting out of there. In those moments of terror that I experienced every day, and I was told it will never end, the officers there, they said, "Yeah, you'll never get out of here." Of course, there was no trial. There's no legal representation. It's just, I'm there. And I really did lost track of time. I didn't think I'm going to ever get out. But the only thing I cared about, it's really nothing, not my ideas, not Israel, not Jews, not Egypt. I just cared about either dying or getting out of there. Even I attempted suicide. Thankfully, it didn't work. Eventually, after they found out that I'm not anything, I'm just an excited nerd, they let me go after 2 months and a half. I was released from that terrible period of imprisonment in December 2010. I was broken completely. A month later, January, the Arab Spring broke out. The demonstrations broke out in Tahrir Square and all over Egypt, and they demanded the ouster of the president. So I joined. And that was kind of the beginning of my interest in politics, and it was entirely based on my experience in 2010. The state's a determination, iron fist policy of no normalization with Israel and of separating the population from anything Jewish or anything Israeli. So I joined the demonstrations at Tahrir Square, 18 days of euphoria. That's the period when the Arab Spring term was coined, a lot of hope. I'm sure you remember the news. There's all of young people asking for change, democracy. And I really thought so, but I got disillusioned pretty quickly. By March, I was already started seeing unfavorable changes. So the rise of Islamism in Egypt and other parts in the Arab world, groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, or really toxic, theocratic political groups that are very dangerous, like the Hamas in the Gaza Strip, starting to rise in power and in popularity. And that's when I realized that things are going to only get worse. And eventually, as you said, I had to leave and to receive political asylum in the United States.
Do you feel still that You're traumatized by that experience? Does it come back to you in moments of your life?
I'm sure it's still there in many ways. I mean, I did, you can imagine the amount of work I had to go through and I had to do, I still have to do in order to get over all of this. And honestly, being able to move past that and being able to continue my life would not have happened without the immense amount of support and love that I got from the Jewish community here in the United States since I moved here. I mean, I can't even begin to describe the amount of love truly that I received, the amount of Jewish families that consider me one of them, Jews, Americans, Israelis, that and give me a lot of support. I have many mothers. I have many mothers who love me. Many Jewish brothers and sisters. And if it wasn't for that support that I needed, I wouldn't have been able to move past this. And thankfully, I'm crying, but I'm crying out of just thinking about all of that love that I received. I wouldn't have been able to move, but thankfully, I'm past this. I'm continuing my life. I'm working now with many Arabs. I'm trying to actually deal with these issues in a sympathetic and sincere way.
It wasn't easy for you to acclimate to life in America.
True. It wasn't. I didn't know pretty much anybody. I had no money. I slept on the streets for a while. Eventually, this is an amazing country. It's truly a blessing to the world. And eventually, I was able to do the many things that I wanted to do and to rebuild a life. But it definitely was not easy to be uprooted from everything and start learning to build a life from scratch, especially that I also was in a crisis at that time as well. It wasn't just that was an immigrant. I was an immigrant who came in on asylum. I was tortured in Egyptian prisons. My identity, my sense of self, I had to not just build a life, but even build myself. And that was an extremely difficult journey.
And it's probably still happening. We always go through life
Yeah.
building ourselves every day, right?
It never stops, truly.
Yeah. But now you're an American citizen?
Thank God, yes, I am. I am an American citizen. I am an educator with Stand With Us, an amazing educational Jewish organization that provides Israel education to communities, to students, high schools, and university campuses. I also work with another organization, Endowment for Middle East Truth, in Met on Capitol Hill, to educate policymakers on the Middle East, on the best policies to serve U.S. interest and Israel interest and Arab interest.
Maybe you can give us some insight and some advice on how to break out of cycles of hate. I mean, I find that your experience is very, very unusual, and it takes a special kind of person to break out of that vortex of passion and hate and prejudice, and to see the world for how it is. Do you think you're uncommon in that respect, or you think that lots of people could do what you did?
I think everybody could do what I did. I called my book A Minority of One. I actually don't think I'm a minority of one anymore. I just think that I was just ahead of the curve. I think there is no other way to move forward as societies, as communities, without doing this. I've met many other young Arabs who did the same, and people don't understand how painful it is. There are two things I want people to do. First of all, to know that this level of hatred does exist. Anti-Semitism is not something of the past. Anti-Semitism is something extremely real. It has a huge legacy, one of the longest legacies, and one of the longest living symbolic complexes in human history, and that makes it a constant danger, kind of a religion that's always going to be there with its symbols, with its meanings, and people will find their way to it, and people will use it.
Do you think it also exists in the form of anti-Zionism? Do you think some of the criticism of Israel, at least in terms of its right to exist, is a form of anti-Semitism?
I absolutely believe so. Israel is the Jewish state. Albert Memmi, a great Jewish author, who wrote this, I think, in the 70s already, and I think it was an amazing insight. He said, one day Israel and Judaism will be the same thing. Israel is Judaism, Judaism is Israel. And I think it's true, and it's happening to a large extent. You can separate animosity to the state of Israel from animosity to Judaism and the Jewish people. I mean, you can be clever or try to be clever and do it abstractly, right? You're just opposed to the abstract idea of an ethno-national state and all of this. But we don't live in the abstract. And I think this is actually a dishonest gimmick that happens all the time, specifically with the issue of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, is that it's abstracted to the highest level when it's no longer visible, right? It's just the cruelty of man to man. You keep abstracting it upwards till you actually no longer see what it is. And I think that this game is played all the time. And this game is dishonest. No, anti-Zionism to a large degree is anti-Semitism, yes.
So, how do we break out of hate? I mean, all of us have our own prejudices, right? It's fed by whatever innate qualities we have, but also we're socialized to have prejudgments. How do we even know about our biases and prejudgments, and how do we break out of that?
We talked about them. We're always going to have prejudices and biases because we're only in this life, we're only granted a partial perspective. And you can enlarge that perspective with a lot of moral and educational cultivation. It will always be a limited perspective. We all have to be aware of that and to accept that. A lot of people find it very hard to accept that and insist on the absolute universality of their own perspective. This is at the core of liberalism, the idea of realizing that we all have our own perspective that can never truly go beyond itself. And I think it's starting breaking out of the hate. The Abrahamic Accords in the Middle East, it's starting a historical change in the Arab Gulf, and it's going to spill to the wider Muslim world. I have absolutely no doubt. So today you do have a will, both political and social, in many parts of the Middle East to move past this legacy of hatred and war and all of this with Israel. I'm very hopeful that this will transform not just Israel's relations with its neighbors, it will transform life in Arab countries. It will transform life in Muslim countries. It's going to take a lot of work. It's not easy because hate is an extremely meaningful emotion. It's actually one of the most meaningful emotions. To end hate, it will have to be substituted with something else. And that's a period of building that hopefully the Middle East is starting to do.
You wrote in your book that fighting hate we do with truth, and I found that to be very profound. Tell us about your first trip to Israel after you had had your eyes opened, and now you come to this country that was the root of all evil in the world. And what do you feel? What do you see?
It was an amazing experience. When I moved to America, I couldn't go anywhere because I was in asylum status, complexities of immigration laws. You shouldn't leave the country. I came to the United States in 2012. And it wasn't before 2019 that I received my American citizenship. So suddenly I acquired an American passport. I can go. I had just got it. And I was actually in a Stand With Us conference. And the amazing CEO was like a mother to me, Ross Rothstein. I told her I just became an American citizen. She said, okay, I'm taking you to Israel. That was in 2019. And I landed actually on Independence Day, Israeli Independence Day. It was just unbelievable to be in this country that completely transformed me so much without ever being there. And to be there in a moment at the biggest party that this country is celebrating its own life, Independence Day, with Israelis, with flags, dancing in the streets. It was an extremely profound experience in which I felt the meaning of my connection with Israel. I'm not Israeli. I'm not Jewish, but I love the Jewish people and I love Israel. And just building a personal relationship with Jewish history, Jewish tradition, Jewish culture, with Zionism, with Israel, helped me immensely to take my life in a very, very different direction. I'm very grateful for this, and it's something that I want to bring to more people.
Have you been back to Egypt? Do you expect to return to Egypt?
I haven't been back to Egypt. It's a risk that I'm not willing to take for the time being. My idea is to be able to go back to Egypt one day, not necessarily to live there again, but to be able to go, first of all, to see my parents. My voice is also important in Egypt. I'm Egyptian. I grew up there. I understand a lot of things that happened to the country, to my generation, that my generation doesn't understand. I have something that might be helpful. I do have some ideas about what went wrong and what's needed to fix it. And it's very difficult because a lot of people, even here in the United States, I actually think the American Academy, and hopefully, I'm sorry to, I have to say this, the American Academy has done the most disservice, intellectual disservice to the entire Muslim and Arab world. And I know that history books will talk about it later.
When you say the American Academy, you mean the intellectual world, the
The
universities?
intellectual world, the people who are specialized in Middle East studies, Islamic studies, and so on and so forth, by deliberately concealing and ignoring the issue of anti-Semitism and its centrality to Arab political and social culture in this last century, whether out of political correctness or out of discomfort or out of liberal biases, this is what Arab societies need to talk about in order to start unraveling a lot of the wreckage and the ruins. And I think I can provide some modest contribution, hopefully, to many other people. So hopefully I can go back. My relationship with my family, we stopped talking for like 8 years, but now actually, thankfully, we talk regularly on the phone. I was able to rebuild a lot of bridges. Now I call them regularly, and they are much more forgiving. I mean, after the Abraham Accord specifically, my mom called me and said they are doing what you said we should do like 10 years ago. It took me a long time myself, and this is something also important to mention, to reconcile myself to my own culture. When I left Egypt, I was broken. I was traumatized. I hated my culture. I'm not going to lie. I hated it. I felt it was inhumane. It was cruel. It was cruel towards its own sons, and it was cruel towards outsiders, both outsiders and insiders. And it took me a long time to gain sympathy and to regain my sense of belonging. I stopped accusing. I don't accuse anymore. I want to help. This is my culture. This is my society. This is where I'm from. It's a great culture. It has amazing traditions. It has amazing history, and it needs rescue. That's my duty, and that's what I'll try to do.
Well, this has been an exhilarating conversation for me. I want to thank you for spending the time with us, sharing your wisdom and your life story. I look forward to many future opportunities to spend time with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi Hirsch. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on here.
This has been a sobering but hopeful discussion. Look how easy it is to be swept into the ocean of emotions and unreason all around us. But remember, Hussein pulled himself out of the riptide, and if he did it, there is hope for others. We have come such a long way as a human species, but we have such a long way to go. Technologically, we have advanced by leaps and bounds. The ancients would have a hard time even understanding modern technology. Yet emotionally, we've hardly changed at all. Essentially, we are the same creatures we've always been. We have the same needs, the same egos as the ancients. It's why their myths, their stories and sacred texts speak so clearly to us today. We recognize ourselves in them. We moderns have the same propensity to violence. We are aggressive, competitive, egotistical, power-driven, exploitative, and selfish. And because we've only advanced slowly in the human realm, but we now have the technology to destroy all life on Earth, the role of religion in these times is more critical than ever. It is to preach the message of the prophet Micah. What does God want of you? Only this: to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. If all we did was to observe just these three standards, justice, mercy, and humility, the world would be such a better place. C.S. Lewis wrote, "Of all bad men, religious bad men are the worst. They are the worst because when they commit transgressions, they validate immorality in the eyes of others. An act of violence becomes a righteous crusade. A murder becomes a noble jihad. The world is turned upside down through an unholy inversion of values. Cruel is kind, killing is compassion, sin is salvation, and horrible is honorable. The Almighty wanted the baby killed. God decreed the collapse of the World Trade Center. At its best, religion is a source of inspiration, not intimidation. The fundamental religious principle is the sanctity of human life. Every life is precious, every life is sacred. The Talmud states that to save a person's life is akin to saving the world entire, and to destroy a life is akin to destroying the world. Imams, friends of mine, have quoted this very principle to me as integral to Islam as well. How did religion become the enemy of progress? In an age when the world is saturated with religious extremism, upright religious leaders must uphold standards of decency and morality, lest we call into question the validity of the religious experience itself. There are no better words to summarize our common task than this final passage in Hussein's book. I was born in North Africa to an Arabic-speaking family. I wanted to become a jihadist at the age of 12. With the help of a slow internet connection, some movies, comic books, and video games, I learned another 2 languages. And instead of becoming a terrorist or an extremist, I became an educator. Hussein concludes his book with this one sentence: there is hope if you let yourself imagine what could be. Till next time, this is In These Times.